But we start this week by looking at something called the Bilderberg Conference. Now, this is a meeting of elites that happens every year. When I say elites, what I mean is mostly bankers, people from the oil industry. I'm talking about Goldman Sachs as bankers, Shell Oil, all the big people, also media. So that is to say some of the big national newspapers, things like News International. His general manager, Rupert Murdoch, goes to these meetings. And essentially they are a place where the West's elite meet together. Now, Will Hutton, the former editor of The Observer, described the Bilderberg as where forming the consensus against which the backdrop of policy was made worldwide. Very powerful meetings, set up in 1954 originally by Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, who was a former SS officer, who then he married into, just before the war, into the Dutch royal family. And he was one of the people who was responsible, many believe, for the disaster of the Battle of Arnhem in the film A Bridge Too Far. But anyway, he was the chairman for the first 20 years when there was something called the Lockheed scandal and he had to resign. And the meeting is one of the most powerful in the Western world, very, very closely connected with NATO. And strange how people like Bill Clinton, Tony Blair, turn up at a Bilderberg meeting and then suddenly the next year they become either leader of the opposition or they get nominated to be president and then become president. So they are kingmakers, effectively. This year's meeting, there's no official announcement. Various investigative journalists and researchers and geeks around the world do their best to try and find out where these meetings are going to take place. And this meeting in 2017, they're usually around the end of May, beginning of June, there's been no leaks whatsoever, apart from a bit of estimation by some of us here in the UK, looking at hotels. It looks like the Westfields Marriott Hotel in Chantilly, Virginia, is going to be where they're meeting at the beginning of June. That is the 1st to the 4th of June at Westfields Marriott, Chantilly, Virginia, but nobody's sure. And for the first time, US police and security services haven't confirmed or denied whether this is the actual meeting, even though that hotel has been block booked for that session. They won't tell anybody who's meeting. So it's just guesswork, effectively. Now, this is an important thing for journalists to look at and know about. But of course, if there is no pre-warning that the meeting's going to be there, it's impossible for it to be covered by anything but the immediate, like Washington media, who happen to be nearby. It involves booking flights, hotels, all that sort of thing. And by which time, if you've done that, potentially anyway, the story's disappeared and everyone's flown home again. So, there's a definite attempt to make this very difficult for the public to follow and for the press to follow and for politicians to follow, for many people. The reason it's so significant is this new French president, Emmanuel Macron. He is very, very close to the Bilderberg Conference. In fact, he went, funnily enough, to the Bilderberg meeting in 2014 in Copenhagen. And everyone was saying, well, who is this guy? We've never seen him before. Suddenly, now in 2017, 3 years later, he's president of France. Come out of nowhere, they say, but no. That actually really means coming out of Bilderberg and the forces that it represents, the NATO forces, the banking forces, the military forces, the various economic forces. So there is also a big thing this year is that the patron of Bilderberg, who's been going for many years, David Rockefeller, from the oil dynasty family in the US, still very, very powerful, one of the richest in the world, but they're very good at hiding their wealth. He died recently at the age of 101. And the bankers and the oil men that used to run Bilderberg in the old days now have passed their curse on to the likes of Peter Thiel and Eric Schmidt. If you've not heard of those, Peter Thiel was the funder of Facebook, the founder of PayPal, now runs things like something called Palantir Technologies, which do data mining for governments. Eric Schmidt, of course, is the Google boss. But these are the sort of people who are now running Bilderberg. And they are very, very influential when it comes to the algorithms, when it comes to elections, this kind of thing. It's a kind of technocracy that they're now running. Also, I wonder if Bilderberg will be discussing the Nazi false flag terror cells which are being uncovered in the German army after a German soldier was caught planting a gun with his fingerprints on, and he'd also registered as a Syrian refugee at Vienna airport. The German police believe he was planning to kill people at Vienna airport, conduct a terror attack, and leave his fingerprints on, so the attack would be blamed on the refugees. So this sort of thing, I wonder if the Bilderberg will be discussing that. I imagine that they will be looking at the appointment of their president to France rather than Marine Le Pen as a victory, in order to try and keep together the EU, which is very much part of what they want to do, a kind of United States of Europe rather modelled on the United States of America. So they'll also, I would imagine, be looking at forwarding the EU army, which is going on apace. I just passed actually a French or a Belgian army patrol on the M5 the other day. I was quite surprised to see them here. What are they up to? Is that still EU army still going ahead? And all the fallout from Brexit, they'll be doing everything they can to make sure that Britain does everything to stay under control of things like the European Central Bank, the European Parliament, and the Eurocrats. So the other thing that might be being discussed there is the proposed merger of the German Bourse stock exchange with the UK stock exchange, which it now looks as if that won't happen. But anyway, all these things being discussed by some of the most powerful, certainly the richest people in the entire Western world, at the Westfields Marriott, Chantilly, Virginia, from the 1st to the 4th of June, or maybe not, because they don't want us to know anything about it. And that's one of the reasons there hasn't been hardly any news stories about it, is because they're keeping it very, very secret, but not on Dialect.